One of the main struggles the bisexual community faces is invisibility, which is bizarre considering in a recently published Gallup survey, more than half of LGBT adults identify as bisexual. That's 3.1% of the American population. And in Generation Z, bisexual people make up even a greater share of the LGBT community. 72% say they identify as bisexual. That's nearly 12% of all Gen Z adults. So why the invisibility, or what the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation refers to as bi-erasure? And I do note the irony that there is no B in their name, but anyways, for starters, you have outsiders that deny bisexuality is a legitimate identity, claiming that it's simply confusion, self-denial, or a transitory step between straighthood and gaydom. Is that a word? Did I just invent that? Individuals who don't want to declare themselves gay for whatever reason choose the safer label of bisexual. And truth be told, this was me between the ages of 16 and 30. Not wanting to recognize or admit that I was gay, I dated both women and men and happily declared myself a bisexual to thwart off any homophobes that were in my circle. That's not to say that I wasn't bisexual. After all, queer theory recognizes that sexuality is fluid, so it is possible that I may have been bi during that period of my life, but now I'm just not. Another reason for bisexual invisibility is that it's difficult to readily identify who's a bisexual. For if a bi man dated another man, he'd be regarded as gay. If that same man dated a woman, it's assumed that he's heterosexual. There's no way a passive observer can know if someone is bi without being explicitly told. And some bisexuals choose to remain under that invisibility cloak as a means to avoid having to face the same sort of marginalization that gays, lesbians, and transgender persons endure. So with that, there's a sort of privilege in the bi label, in that they can have their feet in both camps. Because of this, outed bisexuals may face resentment or other forms of biphobia. Resentment due to them having privilege, resentment for not fully committing to one orientation or the other, resentment fueled by the fact that when a bi person chooses a partner, one side is seemingly gonna lose. One of Jesus' most popular sayings is that no one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. In a religion with such a strong dualistic bias, it is no wonder that the perceived transgressive stance of bisexuality can too often be misunderstood as disloyalty to one of two masters. Thus, accordingly, there's resentment because bisexuality disrupts the established societal binaries of gender and sexual orientation. It's either you're straight or you're gay, there's no in between, but yet here they are. Further, the gay community has extra cause for alarm since bisexuals come across as choosing their sexuality, which reignites that whole argument that sexuality and sexual orientation is a choice and that one simply is not born gay. This happens to be the position of the few churches that recognize the B in LGBT. Most major denominations, including the Roman Catholic Church, simply pivot this identity into their same-sex attraction category of teachings. Bisexual people are almost always overlooked in discussions of sexuality. The Church of England is one of the few who actually acknowledges it, although they don't really have anything positive to say.
The first is that of bisexuality. We recognize that there are those whose sexual orientation is ambiguous and who can find themselves attracted to partners of either sex. Nevertheless, it is clear that bisexual activity must always be wrong for this reason, if for no other, that it inevitably involves being unfaithful. The Church's guidance to bisexual Christians is if they are capable of heterophile relationships and of satisfaction within them, they should follow the way of holiness in either celibacy or abstinence or heterosexual marriage. In the situation of the bisexual, it can also be that counseling will help the person concerned to discover the truth of their personality and to achieve a degree of inner healing.
In other words, deny your bisexuality and choose either the heteropath or abstinence, the way of holiness. Anything else would apparently lead to being unfaithful, perpetuating a stereotype that bisexuals are promiscuous or polyamorous. And the fact that counseling is recommended just reinforces the disease model of anything queer. Bi-erasure and biphobia come at a cost. According to the Bisexuality Resource Center, research suggests that bisexuals suffer worse mental health outcomes than heterosexuals, lesbians, and gay men. These outcomes include higher rates of anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders, higher reporting of self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and suicidal attempts, lower levels of social support, being less likely to be comfortable with their sexuality or being out to friends and family compared to lesbians and gay men, and higher rates of substance abuse, including cigarette smoking and heavy drinking. And then there are the misconceptions. In addition to being perceived as fence-sitters who don't want to declare their homosexuality, bisexuals have been labeled as sexually greedy, synonymous with promiscuity, as leading to multiple partners and adultery, as disease-spreading, and as being incompatible with marriage. So why do you think these misconceptions exist? It comes down to the number of options available. A bisexual person sees no boundaries when it comes to sexual orientation, which means anyone can be a potential partner. So because there's more options, I guess people just assume there's more sex? And more unfaithful sex to that extent? I mean, since boundaries don't seem to matter? So we gotta put this misconception to rest. Bisexual people do not have to have sex with both genders. It is simply that they acknowledge the possibility of being with either or any gender. Really, this stereotype is no different from the reputation that all gay men want to do is have sex with each other, with multiple men. Just because queer people don't fit into a traditional mold doesn't mean we have no control over our bodies. Despite being invisible in the 21st century, it is likely that there were many historical and biblical figures who exhibited what we would call today bisexual tendencies. Pretty much any of those figures we discussed in this course as being gay could easily have been bisexual. This is especially true with our old friend King David, who had that one man he loved more than any of the numerous women, but that didn't stop him from wanting to get with Bathsheba. And he did. Oh, and of course there's the father of Western homophobia, St. Augustine, whose sexual endeavors with women are well documented in his autobiography, The Confessions. But so is an entire chapter written as something that comes across as kind of a love letter to a male friend of his that passed away. Here's a reenactment of a small excerpt.
I wept bitterly and found consolation in my bitterness. I was amazed that other people were alive when the man that I had loved as if he were immortal was dead. I was even more amazed that I was alive when he was dead, since I was his second self. Someone expressed it well when he called his friend half of his soul, for I felt that my soul and my friends had been one soul in two bodies.
Is it possible that this homophobe of homophobes was actually bisexual? Yeah. As I've said before, many of our loudest homophobes are from people struggling with internalized homophobia. As established, Augustine's issue with sex addiction has led to a church full of unhealthy attitudes towards sexual ethics, including his doctrine on original sin. It's equally feasible to deduce that his same internal struggles with his own bisexuality had influenced his works on condemning homosexuality. It's like using the experience of an alcoholic to dictate everyone's drinking habits. Despite our greater understanding of human nature and sexuality today, it floors me that the church leaders still persist in taking their cues about sexual relations from a self-proclaimed recovering sex addict. But I digress. Let's move on to a discussion of bi theology. Admittedly, there's not a whole lot published academically. There's that invisibility again, right? But what we do have is pretty amazing. The bisexual community believes that love transcends all boundaries, which is a message found throughout the Bible. When God first formed the covenant with Abraham, God chose to enter exclusively into a relationship with the Israelites, the Jews. But by the time we get to Christ, a fully universal message is promoted. It is arguable that the dominant story in the Judeo-Christian tradition is the slow evolution from particularism to universalism. Why? Because God's love is not limited to any one particular group. Love transcends boundaries. God goes from a rigid either-or approach to salvation to a both-and approach. Heck, even the nature of Jesus himself reflects this. He's not either human or God, but both 100% human and 100% God. If we can understand this dual nature of Jesus, surely we can understand the dual nature of a bisexual, right? Additionally, to the extent that God's love extends to men and women, God can be called bi or pansexual. Not only in gender, but in all ways, God's love is not limited by societal boundaries. God's love flows freely over our systems of limitation. This is why bisexual theology will tend towards some kind of universalism, including an ecological theology. Recognizing that truth can be found in all religions, and since some traditional religions tend to deny their identity, some bi Christians have adopted a religious buffet approach to devotion, choosing what works for them, regardless of which tradition claims ownership. And what is noteworthy of this approach to religion is that, according to theologian James Fowler, this is actually an advanced stage of faith development. Because when you restrict devotion to rigid barriers or what you can and cannot do based on your identity, you're stuck in what he calls the third stage of faith, which is the faith of a 12-year-old. Moving on, having presented on some of the collective experiences of being bisexual as well as a glimpse of their theology, we're going to conclude this lesson today by developing a praxis for institutional change. And we can use Moses as a springboard. Moses was born Hebrew but raised Egyptian. He had a dual identity and witnessed firsthand the persecution of his ancestral people by the people he lived alongside. Given the cultural conditions, he may have been tempted to suppress his Hebrew side and just live as an Egyptian. Why be a slave when you can be a prince, right? But when the oppression reached its boiling point, Moses lashed out, killed an Egyptian, and ran away. In Midian, he began a new life as a shepherd. When he encountered the burning bush, God identified God's self as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, Moses' ancestors. God reminded Moses who Moses is. He is Hebrew. So go rescue your people, Moses. The bisexual person passing as straight also sees oppression. And it is in the moment of observing gay bashing, discrimination, and hatred that the bisexual person has to make a decision. Will they recognize that this discrimination is against their own people and thus do something about it? Embracing the community's privilege of being able to see both sides of the oppression lays the foundation for bridge building. So the first thing bisexuals need to do is come out and be visible. Coming out is a form of ministry. It's a form of justice because it enables others to do likewise. It creates then a community, which is particularly important in a community that is absent of one. communities are essential for faith building and witnessing. This is why churches exist. Communities provide the security and breathing space where people can reflect on their experience and begin the hermeneutical circle which produces theology. The gay and lesbian community can assist this effort of bi visibility by doing away with the "bi now, gay later" epitaph that creates a hostile climate for bisexual people. Organizations claiming to be LGBT must offer bi-specific programming and resources, as they are a unique identity within the queer community. It's time for us all to stand up against oppression and build bridges. The bi community is a living example that boundaries must never divide humankind in a way that prevents love.